phenomenological exhibition of the being of beings encountered nearest to us can be accomplished under the guidance of the everyday being in the world, which we also call dealings in umgang in the world with inner-worldly being. Such dealings are already dispersed in manifold ways of taking care. However, as we showed, the closest kind of dealing is not mere perceptual cognition erkennen, but rather a handling, using, and taking care which has its own kind of knowledge, erkenntnis. Our phenomenological question is initially concerned with the being of those beings encountered when taking care of something. A methodical remark is necessary to secure the kind of seeing required here. The disclosure and explication of being. Beings are always our preliminary and accompanying theme. The real theme is being. What shows itself in taking care in the surrounding world constitutes the pre-thematic being in the domain of our analysis. This being is not the object of a theoretical world cognition. It is what is used, produced, and so on. As a being thus encountered, it comes pre-thematically into view for a knowing, which, as a phenomenological knowing, primarily looks toward being, and on the basis of this thematization of being thematizes actual beings as well. Thus, this phenomenological interpretation is not a cognition of existent qualities of beings, but rather a determination of the structure of their being. But as an investigation of being, it independently and explicitly brings about the understanding of being which always already belongs to Dasein and is alive in every dealing with beings. Phenomenologically pre-thematic beings, what is used and produced, become accessible when we put ourselves in the place of taking care in the world. Strictly speaking, to talk of putting ourselves in the place of taking care is misleading. We do not first need to put ourselves in the place of this way of being in dealing with and taking care. Everyday Dasein always already is in this way. For example, in opening the door, I use the doorknob. Gaining phenomenological access to the beings thus encountered consists rather in rejecting the interpretive tendencies crowding and accompanying us which cover over the phenomenon of taking care, in general, and thus even more so beings as they are encountered of their own accord in taking care. These insidious mistakes become clear when we ask, which beings are to be our preliminary theme and established as a pre-phenomenal basis. One answers things. Perhaps we have already missed the pre-phenomenal basis we are looking for with this self-evident answer. For an unexpressed anticipatory ontological characterization is contained in addressing beings as things, res. An analysis which starts with such beings and goes on to inquire about being comes up with the thingliness and reality. Ontological explication thus finds, as it proceeds, characteristics of being such as substantiality, materiality, extendedness, side-by-sidedness. But the beings encountered and taken care of are also pre-ontologically hidden at first in this being same. When one designates things as the beings that are initially given, one goes astray ontologically, although one means something else ontically. What one really means remains indefinite. Or else one characterizes these things as valuable things. What does value mean ontologically? How is this having value and being involved with value to be understood categorically? Apart from the obscurity of this structure of having value, is the phenomenal character of being of what is encountered and taken care of in association thus attained. The Greeks had an appropriate term for things, itpoi microatia, that is, that with which one has to do in taking care in dealings, 7 tpatg. But the specifically pragmatic character of the 7 tpa 7 microat is just what was left in obscurity and initially determined as mere thing. We shall call the beings encountered in taking care useful things u. In our dealings we find utensils for writing, utensils for sewing, utensils for working, driving, measuring. We must elucidate the kind of being of useful thing. This can be done following the guideline of the previous definition of what makes a useful thing, its utility. Strictly speaking, there is no such thing as a useful thing. There always belongs to the being of a useful thing a totality of useful things in which this useful thing can be what it is. A useful thing is essentially something in order to. The different kinds of in order to, such as serviceability, helpfulness, usability, handiness, constitute a totality of useful thing. The structure of in order to, umzu, contains a reference verweisung of something to something. Only in the following analyses can the phenomenon indicated by this word be made visible in its ontological genesis. At this time, our task is to bring a multiplicity of references phenomenally into view. In accordance with their character of utility, Useful things always are in terms of their belonging to other useful things. Writing utensils, pen, ink, paper, desk blotter, table, lamp, furniture, windows, doors, room. These things never show themselves initially by themselves, in order then to fill out a room as a sum of real things. What we encounter as closest to us, although we do not grasp it thematically, is the room, not as what is between the four walls in a geometrical spatial sense, but rather as something useful for living. On the basis of this, an organization shows itself, and in this organization any individual useful thing shows itself. A totality of useful things is always already discovered before the individual useful thing. Dealings geared to useful things, which show themselves genuinely only in such dealings. For example, hammering with a hammer, neither grasps these beings thematically as occurring things, nor does such using even know the structure of useful things as such. Hammering does not just have a knowledge of the useful character of the hammer, rather, it has appropriated this utensil in the most adequate way possible. In such useful dealings, taking care subordinates itself to the in order to constitutive for the particular utensil in our dealings. The less we just stare at the thing called hammer, the more we take hold of it and use it, the more original our relation to it becomes, and the more undisguisedly it is encountered as what it is, as a useful thing. The act of hammering itself discovers the specific handiness, handlichkeit of the hammer. We shall call the useful things kind of being in which it reveals itself by itself handiness zuhendena. It is only because useful things have this being in themselves, and sitchin, and do not merely occur, that they are handy in the broadest sense and are at our disposal. No matter how keenly we just look at the outward appearance of things constituted in one way or another, we cannot discover handiness. When we just look at things theoretically, we lack an understanding of handiness. But a dealing which makes use of things is not blind. It has its own way of seeing which guides our operations and gives them their specific certainty. Our dealings with useful things are subordinate to the manifold of references of the in order to. The kind of seeing of this accommodation to things is called circumspection umzik. Practical behavior is not atheoretical in the sense of a lack of seeing. The difference between it and theoretical behavior lies not only in the fact that in one case we observe and in the other instance we act, and that action must apply theoretical cognition if it is not to remain blind. Rather, observation is a kind of taking care, just as primordially as action has its own kind of seeing. Theoretical behavior is just looking, non-circumspect. Because it is non-circumspect, looking is not without rules, its canon takes shape in method. Handiness is not grasped theoretically at all, nor is it itself initially a theme for circumspection. What is peculiar to what is initially at hand is that it withdraws, so to speak, in its character of handiness in order to be really handy. What everyday dealings are initially busy with is not tools themselves, but the work. What is to be produced in each case is what is primarily taken care of, and is thus also what is at hand. The work bears the totality of references in which useful things are encountered. As the wazoo of the hammer, plane, and needle, the work to be produced has in its turn the kind of being of a useful thing. The shoe to be produced is for wearing footgear, the clock is made for telling time. The work which we primarily encounter when we deal with things and take care of them, what we are at work with always already lets us encounter the what for of its usability and the usability which essentially belongs to it. The work that has been ordered exists in its turn only on the basis of its use, and the referential context of beings discovered in that use. But the work to be produced is not just useful for production itself, is always a using of something for something. A reference to materials is contained in the work at the same time. The work is dependent upon leather, thread, nails, and similar things. Leather in its turn is produced from hide. These hides are taken from animals which were bred and raised by others. We also find animals in the world which were not bred and raised, and even when they have been raised, these beings produce themselves in a certain sense. Thus beings are accessible in the surrounding world which in themselves do not need to be produced and are always already at hand. Hammer, tongs, nails in themselves refer to they consist of steel, iron, metal, stone, wood. Nature is also discovered in the use of useful things, nature in the light of products of nature. But nature must not be understood here as what is merely objectively present, nor as the power of nature. The forest is a forest of timber, the mountain a quarry of rock, the river is water power, the wind is wind in the sails. As the surrounding world is discovered, nature, thus discovered, is encountered along with it. We can abstract from nature's kind of being as handiness. We can discover and define it in its mere objective presence vorhanden. But in this kind of discovery of nature, nature as what stirs and strives, what overcomes us, entrances us as landscape, remains hidden. The botanist's plants are not the flowers of the hedgerow. The river's source, ascertained by the geographer, is not the source in the ground. The work produced refers not only to the what for wazoo of its usability, and the whereof waros of which it consists. The simple conditions of craft contain a reference to the wearer and user at the same time. The work is cut to his figure. He is there as the work emerges. This constitutive reference is by no means lacking when wares are produced by the dozen. It is only undefined, pointing to the random and the average. Thus not only beings which are at hand are encountered in the work, but also beings with the kind of being of Dasein, for whom what is produced becomes handy in its taking care. Here the world is encountered in which wearers and users live, a world which is at the same time our world. The work taken care of in each case is not only at hand in the domestic world of the workshop, but rather in the public world. Along with the public world, the surrounding world of nature is discovered and accessible to everyone. In taking care, nature is discovered as having some definite direction on paths, streets, bridges, and building. A covered railroad platform takes bad weather into account. Public lighting systems take darkness into account, the specific change of the presence and absence of daylight, the position of the sun. Clocks take into account a specific constellation in the world system. When we look at the clock, we tacitly use the position of the sun, according to which the official astronomical regulation of time is carried out. The surrounding world of nature is also at hand in the usage of clock equipment, which is at first inconspicuously at hand. Our absorption in taking care of things in the work world nearest to us has the function of discovering, depending upon the way we are absorbed, inner-worldly beings that are brought along together with their constitutive references are discoverable in varying degrees of explicitness, and with a varying attentive penetration. The kind of being of these beings is handiness zuhendenite. But it must not be understood as a mere characteristic of interpretation, as if such aspects were discursively forced upon beings, which we initially encounter, as if an initially objectively present world stuff were subjectively colored in this way. Such an interpretation overlooks the fact that in that case beings would have to be understood beforehand and discovered as purely objectively present, and would thus have priority and take the lead in the order of discovering and appropriating dealings with the world. But this already goes against the ontological meaning of cognition, which we showed to be a founded mode of being in the world. To expose what is merely objectively present, cognition must first penetrate beyond things at hand being taken care of. Handiness is the ontological categorical definition of beings, as they are in themselves. But there are handy things, after all, only on the basis of what is objectively present. Admitting this thesis, does it then follow that handiness is ontologically founded in objective presence? But if, in our continuing ontological interpretation, handiness proves to be the kind of beings first discovered within the world, if its primordiality can ever be demonstrated over and against mere objective presence, does what we have explained up to now contribute in the least to an ontological understanding of the phenomenon of world? We have, after all, always presupposed world in our interpretation of these inner-worldly beings. Joining these beings together does not result as a sum in something like world. Is there then any path at all leading from the being of these beings to showing the phenomenon of world?